Jones is kind of a pioneer to some degree in internet reviewing. Back in 2007, he started a internet web show called The Cinema Snob on YouTube. And it was basically him sitting in a chair or on a couch in what I would assume is his den, and he would review pretty much exploitation movies, bad horror movies, and quite a lot porn movies. But these are like porn movies from the 70s and 80s, back when porn movies kind of had some production value and they tried to have plot and they were shot on film or videotape. Like they were a bit more movie-like than they are today. And the internet show was very popular, but his show was taken down from YouTube for copyright infringement, and eventually the Cinema Snob moved to Blip, and he became part of Channel Awesome, a website that hosts many internet movie reviewing shows, many of whom have been very inspiring and have motivated me to get up off my ass and try it myself and really try to just do some projects and do stuff that I feel is worth something and really get me out there. And my main inspiration has been a web show called The Nostalgia Critic, but at the same time, Brad Jones and the Cinema Snob and many others, they have been a huge amount of inspiration and motivation. And aside from being a web critic, Brad Jones is also a filmmaker. Yeah, he's actually written, directed, and sort of released full feature-length films with a full cast of people and some production value. And Brad Jones's movies are not really available on DVD. They're mostly only viewable online, primarily through his own website, thecinemasnob.com. And there's many reasons to this. Brad Jones, his movies have pretty amazing soundtracks, but at the same time, he's not really one to ask permission to use things like movie clips or songs. He pretty much just puts it in there, and at a convention where he had like an auditorium size amount of fans there listening to him, and when he was asked about copyright rules, all he had to say was, with the mic, "Fuck them," and the whole audience just erupted in applause. And so yeah, like most of his movies, they're only viewable online because he can't really release them and have for people to buy. But nonetheless, that doesn't hurt the enjoyment of viewing his movies, because he's actually made a lot of very impressive movies. And Brad Jones, he prefers shooting movies, his own movies, on videotape, VHS, kind of like a tribute in a way to cheap horror movies that were made in the 1980s that were shot on VHS to kind of give that kind of a grainy, gritty feel. And it really works, because when you see his movies, they give kind of a uneasy feel to them, and it works. Like most of his movies, from what I've heard, they were shot on high H tapes. I actually have a camera that works with those. It's very old. It's the first camera I ever had. It's actually probably about 12 or it's about 13 years old now, and it's pretty cool. And watching his movies, like, because I'm a huge fan of his show, The Cinema Snob, and watching his movies, like, well, the first movie, well, let me explain this. The first credited feature-length film that he directed was called Sadistic Bitch, and it's labeled as being made in 2003, and this movie is pretty much lost because, as Brad said, someone broke into his home and they stole all the copies he had of the movie, so it's no longer viewable, which is a fucking shame. And I read that the plot was a woman discovers her husband is cheating on her, so she conspires to cut off his dick and then give him a sex change. Brad has no shame. He loves exploitation films, and he admits he's an exploitation filmmaker, and he does a very good job at it. His movies are very exploitive, they're very gritty, they're very gross, but at the same time they're very engaging. Some of them will probably be too intense to the wimp bitches out there. But if you can stomach the really intense stuff, you could probably stomach his movies. The first movie he made, like, the earliest of his films that's viewable on his website is a movie called Freak Out. It came out in 2003, and Freak Out is very interesting. Freak Out is loosely based on the last day in the life of Dean Corll. His last name was spelled Corll. That's the best pronunciation I can make. And Dean Corll was at one point the most notorious serial killer in America. At least in his time. He was around in the 70s, mid-70s. And he murdered, I think, dozens of young boys and men. He was like a gay pedophile. And the last night of his life, Dean Corll had two teenage boys who he paid to get him young men and boys for him to torture and kill. And the last night of his life, one of the boys ended up bringing a girl over, and it just fucked up this already very insane, evil man. Okay, I wouldn't say insane, just evil. Like, he knew what he was doing, but he was still fucking evil. And this led to many things that eventually led to one of the teens who he hired killing Corll. Brad Jones, for some reason, he decided to make a film that was not a true telling of this final night, but moreover just a dramatization for him to do all the exploitive shit he wanted. And the movie is definitely low production value, but at the same time it's impressive because he obviously had to work with what he had, like maybe his own house or a friend's house, and some scenes shot in big areas, from what I've heard, from what I've read, were probably belong to like friends or family. And Brad himself plays Dean Corll. In the movie he's just called Dean. And the actors he has in this are very good. Well, they work well enough. Like, when you see his movies, you know it's like the actors in Brad Jones's movies are mainly his friends and his buddies or girlfriends, stuff like that. And for a bunch of friends, they usually do a pretty good, decent job with their acting skills. Brad plays Dean, and as playing a serial killer, he plays him really fucked up and twisted and with a lot of emotional problems. And there are scenes when he's not being a sadistic sadist where he acts kind of human, like to those who don't suspect what he really is. And Brad can be pretty comfortable to look at when he's not being total psycho fucking cotic. And you can see why some of the characters would not suspect. And the other actors in this film are Nick Foster, who plays the main kid who kind of ended up killing the real Dean Coral. I don't think I'm spoiling anything because it's a real story and you all know how real stories end. So yeah, Nick Foster plays Wayne, the kid who killed Dean Coral, and he's a pretty insufferable, whiny bitch cunt pussy. He's just a very whiny character, and it kind of fits him, I guess. Like, in the end, you kind of like him in a way, because he's really doesn't have the guts to do anything, but in the end he ends up kind of being the savior in a way, but at the same time he's been involved in all these horrible fucking crimes and he's not completely innocent. And I thought Nick Foster did a okay job. The other teen character, well, this character really isn't a teen in the movie. I don't know if he was in real life. I think he was like late teens, early 20s. The other main character is named David, and he's played by a guy named Buford Stowers, who has been in a few of Brad Jones's movies, and Buford does an okay job, just plays kind of a sleazy, bad, goon type character. And the others are Sarah Ogg. Her last name is spelled O-G-G. She's the lead actress in this movie. She plays like a kind of a slut who has an abusive father, and she's kind of friendly with Wayne, but he's too nervous to have sex with her. And they go to a party, which ends up being at Dean's house. And her character, Rhonda, yeah, well, like I said, she's kind of a bitchy slut who is too, like all the other characters, is too fucking dumb to realize what Dean is up to. And Brad Jones has a few introductory videos on his website for his movies. Not all of them, but some. For Freak Out, he mentions that there's a scene and featured topless nudity from Sarah Ogg, and I guess because of internet standards, he had to black bar it. And he said it really kind of killed the mood for the scene. And I agree, that was kind of a mood killer, but it didn't ruin the whole movie. And what I noticed was the movie's video quality is very poor, because like I said, it's obvious these were all shot on like tapes, and over time the tapes have probably aged badly and he had to upload them to the website. He even said that they had to work hard to make them viewable. But you get so caught up in the story, you kind of forget the bad quality and just go with it. And it really helps build the intense mood for this movie. The only other main actor in this film is David Gobble. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He plays like another kid in this film who's oblivious to Dean's intentions. Real fucking dumb kid who just wants sex and drugs and ends up having bad consequences. I thought Freak Out, Brad Jones's first two movies, Freak Out being the first, they are honestly some of the most depraved movies I've ever seen. They feature some of the most disturbing content I've ever seen, and it's actually made me feel sick to see it. I watched it, but it still made me feel sick. Like, it's impressive to me when a movie can do that to me, because I can really stomach some very intense shit. And there's a scene, and they had to black bar the woman's breasts, but there's a scene where apparently Dean tortures a guy by sticking a corkscrew, I think, into the hole in the guy's dick. And that really made me feel uneasy. And some of the dialogue he says describing the way he's tortured young men in their genitalia was really disturbing. Like, it just, yeah, it is disturbing, but for once, when watching movies, it really disturbed me. And I felt uneasy, and it was a very effective thriller. And despite the fact that Dean is a evil, horrible character, and pretty much everyone in this film is either horrible or just unbearable. It's a movie where everybody's unlikable, but it kind of works, kind of like a Tarantino movie where everybody's a bad guy criminal. And there's a scene where Brad's character Dean, he's as one of his more vulnerable type moments, and he talks about feeling lonely, and talks to this guy about how he likes him, and he kisses him, and the guy just erupts yelling at him, "I'm not gay, you're a fag," and he just beats the shit out of him. And it just made, like, you hate Dean for everything else he's done, but this guy, the way he reacts, just, you hate him either way, you hate him too, and there's just no one likable in this fucking movie. And I bring this up because despite the bad characters, I find Brad Jones to be someone who I just love to see kiss people. Like, whether it be man or woman, like, he's very hot to look at when he kisses people. And Brad's not like a model type good looking, but he just, whenever he does a romantic scene he's very good at doing romantic scenes for his movies, and especially with himself. Like, when he kisses this guy in this movie, I really just felt a jolt of being turned on, and I think he does this stuff very well, and the same can be said for the later movies where he does this stuff with women. Like, it's just either hot, sensual, or genuinely heartfelt romantic. I know that's weird to talk about for a movie that I've just described, like Freak Out, but either way, it's a great, disturbing thriller, and if you like being disturbed on the edge of your seat, this movie has it all, like countless swearing, torture, drugs, partying, male on male rape, and there's a rape scene in this movie, and it's done very well. Like, it's very serious, it's not done for any shitty dumb laugh, or it's not badly filmed. It's done well, and it is very disturbing. I wouldn't say Deliverance disturbing, I'd say more like Pulp Fiction disturbing, but it's done well. And Freak Out, I like Freak Out a lot, and I recommend it. Brad Jones's next movie, his second film, is like Freak Out, one of the most depraved films I've ever seen in my life. It's called Cheap. Basically, it's a movie about people in the porn industry and people in the snuff film industry merging together, and it has many of the same actors returning, such as David Gobble, Buford Stowers, Nick Foster, and Brad Jones himself again, working as actor, writer, and director, all three, and he does a very great job. Cheap, the whole film is about a snuff filmmaker making movies that he gets distributed on a porn website, and the guy who runs it is a drug addict, misogynist who is too fucking stupid to know any better of what he's putting on his website. This movie is filled with a ton of Yes, as you expect, very grisly scenes. Scenes of Brad Jones plays the snuff filmmaker, Jack Stone, and Jack has like people desperate for money, murder homeless people who he offers money, and they film it, and the scenes are obviously done with cheap effects because their budgets are limited. The IMDb claims these movies' budgets range from like $10,000 to $20,000, but I'm not sure. Like I'd say maybe a few thousand. Like definitely more than. Like it definitely costs. They had to have cost something. The productions aren't big, but the production looks big, but it was obviously not big when they made it. But they pulled off making it look better than it probably was when they shot it. David Gobble plays Max Force, the porn producer of the website, and David Gobble, he's a very good but also interesting actor. Like he's been in many of Brad's things. Brad Jones uses many of the same actors, his same friends in many of his projects, whether it be the Cinema Snob or his other shows like DVD Hell, The Reviewers, which is very inspiring as well. Like The Reviewers shows kind of what it's like to try and make it as an internet critic. And if you want to try to get into like internet shows, maybe you should see The Reviewers. It could give you a few ideas, but also be very enjoyable. David Gobble has been a part of many of Brad Jones's projects, and in Cheap, he does a pretty good job as this. Like I said with Freak Out, and Brad has admitted this in like his introductory video for Cheap, there are no likable characters, such as Brad is a snuff film director, David Gobble is a porn producer, Nick Foster, who played the bitch wimp in Freak Out, is here again, and in Freak Out he had a shaved head, but in Cheap he has kind of long curly hair. He plays a pedophile cameraman who shoots the snuff films, and there is just everybody in this film is fucking sick. And this movie is pretty sick, but it had a big impact here when I saw it. And if you like being really hit right in the fucking chest by that stuff, if you like being hit in the chest by movies that just take it all to the extreme, then then check out Cheap or not. If you can't stomach that stuff, then don't. But yeah, everybody does a good job in this. There are two actresses in this named Carrie Jo Stuckey and Jessica Stone, and they do a good job playing some pretty twisted bitches in this. And Ryan Mitchell, who has been a producer for many of Brad Jones's movies, like he's produced several. He plays a gay porn director, and once again would freak out in that one scene where a serial killer sadist kisses a guy. Brad Jones can portray romantic scenes very well, and so far the best romantic scenes for his first two movies were the gay romantic scenes, and I really love that. Like they were very subtle, like not in your face, but they were very good. Like it just shows like some genuinely like I feel like they were real romance. And there's a scene where the gay porn director meets with a gay porn star named Carl Cox, and they have a brief scene together that's pretty touching. Well, I wouldn't know if I'd say touching, but it has a good romantic setting and mood that will come to tragedy soon. And Cheap, I think Cheap is very good, very intense, and like Freak Out, it has many, like I said, with the grisly scenes. The grisliest scene of all, and this is one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever seen in a movie, period. They force a guy tied up to watch a video of a woman having her baby still. This is a spoiler card, and when I hold this up, it'll let you know that I'm about to say something that's kind of a spoiler. And when I hold it up again later, it'll mean the spoiling is over. When I hold this up, mute it, and when I'm done spoiling, unmute. The very disturbing scene involves the snuff filmmakers holding this guy's head, forcing him to watch a TV set, which has on it the killers taking the guy's pregnant wife, and they just cut her baby out and stab her, gut her, make her bleed to death, and with the baby. And I was shocked that they went this far. They stabbed the baby to death, and they're pretty. It's kind of jumbled, so you don't see a lot of everything. But this scene, it is probably the most disturbing movie scene I've ever watched, and once again, I am impressed that this movie could really disturb me. And throughout the scene, like I said, Brad has a great way of putting good songs. A reviewer on the IMDb mentioned that only like Brad Jones is kind of like Quentin Tarantino when it comes to picking a perfect soundtrack, and I fully agree. This scene where they cut out this woman's baby and kill them both. They have a song playing, and it'll remind you of the stuck in the middle scene from Reservoir Dogs in a way, if you've seen that. When they cut out the baby, the song playing is like an old time classic. Jabub, jabub, my baby. Jabub, jabub, my baby. Jabub, jabub, my baby. All while the baby is being cut out and the mother and it just butchered to death. And this is the most disturbing scene I have ever watched, and if that puts you off entirely, I understand. But if you can stomach that kind of shit, if you can stomach movies like Pulp Fiction, Hostel, you can stomach this. Even though it's grisly, it is a step up above Hostel. Hostel is pretty much just torture porn, but this movie is probably arguably torture porn, but I think it's very well made, and I have a lot of respect for Brad Jones, and I thought he did a very good job by portraying this movie with all these disturbing subject matters. Well, the spoiling is over, and I've said what I had to say about Cheap. The third film that Brad Jones made after Freak Out and Cheap is another gritty, kind of disturbing movie. But unlike Freak Out and Cheap, this movie is not as depraved, and it's probably the most watchable of his gritty films in a way. It's called Midnight Heat. It came out in 2007, and it is, as Brad Jones has said, I fully agree, it's a sleazy 80s cop movie. It's set in a fictional city called Lake City in 1987, and it all takes place in one night as the streets are roamed with prostitutes, pimps, and cops, and there's a lot of heavy drug use being done and a serial killer on the loose. This movie just is very rapid, goes by so fast. It's got a beating heart to it. Just and this was the first movie to feature a major role by Brad Jones's other regular actor and very good friend, Jake Norvell. And he plays a cocaine-addicted cop named Detective Rick Wilson. And throughout the film, he constantly says, "I'm Detective Rick fucking Wilson." The acting in this movie, like all the others, like they do a good job, but it's pretty corny, campy, and silly at times. Like they're exploitation films, but they do a very good job nonetheless. And Jake says some pretty gross lines, like it's dripping faster than something. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he says it's going faster than cum dripping from a whore's vagina. I think that's what he says. And I showed the clip to my grandfather and he went, "Ugh." But yeah, Midnight Heat has pretty much everything you would want from a gritty film that's set in the 80s about prostitution. It's kind of like a movie that not many people know about from the 80s that's also about crime and prostitution. It's called Vice Squad 1982, and Brad Jones has said that's one of his top favorite movies, and Midnight Heat kind of has a similar feeling. It's cheaper, obviously, but it also has the same level of disturbance. And it's also the first lead role for Bianca Queen, who has appeared in 3 of Brad's movies. She plays the main hooker named Donna, who is kind of bitchy, but has her nice moments. Like, a lot of the women in this movie are... I think every woman in Midnight Heat is a hooker who's kind of a bitch. But Bianca Queen, she's like the good one, and there's this other friendly hooker played by one of Brad's friends, regulars, Sarah Lewis, and she plays a nice hooker. And Brad Jones himself plays like this pimp who's got a mental disorder named Martin. And it's all about this night where there's a serial killer on the loose and everybody's trying to either stay alive, catch him, or just make money. And Brad plays a very complex role and kind of similar to his performance as Dean in Freak Out, but not as demented or twisted. At the same time, nicer, but still has a lot of big issues. This film has a perfect, amazing soundtrack. Like, the opening credits for this movie are incredible. It's just a montage of the camera going over the streets of Lake City, showing the many hookers, prostitutes, standing around, walking, and the song playing is Self-Control by Laura Branigan, and the intense opening score to this song just sets the mood for this movie perfectly. And then the lyrics come in where she like Laura Branigan, she's no longer alive, but she did a great singing job, and she had a great singing voice, and had her singing voice it carried a lot of depth, like sadness in some areas, and Self-Control is a very dark and kind of gothic song where she sings, "You take myself, you take myself, you take my self-control." And the song has a great line where she just goes, "I live among the creatures of the night." The whole song just fits the tone perfectly with the prostitution theme, and it works just well. There's a great moment where there's a lot of I love that Brad Jones has a lot of smoking in his movies. Like, even in today's age where smoking is so fucking taboo. And there's a scene where he ends up shooting several people and he just collapses on the ground. And kind of on the ground, he just pops a cig in and lights up. It was a cool scene, like, he just killed some people, like, needs a cigarette, and kind of what my grandfather said, and yeah, it's a good way to put it. It's pretty cool and awesome in the middle of all this big chaos. Midnight Heat, Brad Jones has said that Midnight Heat is his personal favorite out of all the movies he's directed. I can see why. I wouldn't call it my personal favorite, but I still love it. It's still great. It's still pretty amazing, especially for what they had, and it has that grainy videotape feel that just adds to it. Brad, he has a term for movies that are shot on videotape. Shot on shitio. And these movies and all their shitio glory are just great. I'm not trying to steal from Brad and his terms, but he kind of came up with it and it fits it perfectly and he does a great job. Oh, and ironically, like, this porn director, Roger Watkins, who Brad constantly makes fun of his movies on his show The Cinema Snob. In the 80s, he actually made a movie called Midnight Heat, and no relation to this film, and Brad actually later reviewed it as The Cinema Snob years after Midnight Heat. Like, Brad Jones started doing The Cinema Snob around the time he did Midnight Heat. Overall, great movie, and I recommend it. You can see it on thecinemasnob.com.